Creativity is thinking up new things. Innovation is doing new things. This is a quote from the late Theodore Levitt, renowned economist and Harvard Business School professor. I'm John Osborne, managing partner at Good Growth Capital based in Charleston. Innovation is at the forefront of our industry, and doing new things has catapulted us into areas much faster than anticipated. According to a poll by the World Economic Forum, more than 90% of healthcare executives believe COVID-19 will fundamentally change their businesses, and 85% predict lasting changes in customers' preferences. Among healthcare leaders, 2/3 expect this period to be the most challenging in their career. Digital transformation will continue to be an important part of this evolving system. Caroline Brown, Chief External Affairs Officer at MUSC, will moderate our first keynote discussion focused on the power of digital innovation and its impact on our healthcare delivery. Joining Caroline will be Jamie Harper, Vice President of U.S. Education at Microsoft, Bill Stanlander, Commercial Lead at Verily Life Sciences, a Google company, and MUSC Health CEO, Dr. Pat Cawley.
Thank you so much, John, for teeing up this session perfectly. I'm Caroline Brown, Chief External Affairs Officer at MUSC, the Medical University of South Carolina. I also happen to be an SCbio board member, the conference chair this year, and the moderator for our session called The Power of Innovation, which is presented by MedPoint today. Before we kick off, we want to express our gratitude to our sponsor for this segment. As conference chair, I'm especially grateful for all of our industry partners who have made today's event possible. Since 2002, MedPoint has been providing regulatory and clinical affairs consulting and training across the globe. In fact, more than 90 countries where they serve. They mainly serve medical device, biotech, and pharma industries and provide consulting on clinical trials, audit practices, ensuring quality management systems, and other regulations. So just remember, if you have any needs in the regulatory and clinical affairs consulting realm, please check out medpoint.com. I'm looking forward to a fantastic discussion today with our keynote panel, and I'm really going to let our panelists introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their organizations, so I'll keep my introductions especially brief. I am thrilled to have with us today Bill Statlander, Commercial Lead at Verily, which is an Alphabet and Google subsidiary, Jamie Harper, Vice President for Microsoft, and Dr. Patrick Cawley, our Health System CEO at MUSC. Thank you all so much for taking the time to be with SCbio today and to discuss the power of innovation. And more specifically, we're going to delve into digital transformation. So without further ado, I'd love to kick us off. We want to hear a little bit more about each of you and your organization. And just to make it a little more personal, I'd love for each of you to end with one thing that you like doing when you're not leading your organizations in digital transformation. So Dr. Cawley, let's start with you.
All right. Thanks, Caroline. I really look forward to this conversation today. As Caroline said, Pat Cawley, I'm CEO of the Health System here at the Medical University of South Carolina. We are a traditional academic health system, which means that we have a heavy reliance on our academic partners, but we also have some community components as well to our health system, which spans the entire state of South Carolina. What do I like to do? Well, if you look over my shoulder there, you'll see a sailboat, and I just love to have the wind going through my hair. So that's what I like to do when I have time off, but there's not been a lot of that in the past year.
Yeah, no kidding. Great. Well, thanks for being with us, Dr. Cawley. Bill, how about you next?
Sure. Thanks, Caroline. And I'm really excited to be part of this this panel today, and hopefully I can share some interesting insights. So my name is Bill Stallinger. I'm the commercial lead for Verily Life Sciences. Verily is a subsidiary of Alphabet, which is a Google sister company. And we used to be called Google Life Sciences before we rebranded. We're about 5 years old at this point and have raised over $2.5 billion in funding and have over 1,000 employees. So we're taking on some really challenging, and transformative things in the healthcare industry. And we're really set up around three big areas. One is around healthcare delivery. So we partner with health systems and employers and payers providers to provide solutions around health and wellness and care delivery. We also have another group that partners with life sciences companies to develop new and innovative technologies around wearables, sensors, some molecular things. And then we also have a division that is focused around clinical research and using digital tools around that called Baseline. I have been in the industry for about 20 years at this point, with some big companies like Boston Scientific and McKinsey and Company, and then I also have worked for some small startups as well. And outside of work, I really enjoy being a father to 3 kids, spend a lot of time with them. And this past year, we've all been in the same home, all doing studying and working. So I've gotten a chance to see them a lot more and spend more time with them.
That's fantastic. If there are silver linings of the pandemic, I think more time with family has definitely been one. Thanks for sharing. Jamie, let's go to you.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Also very excited to be part of the discussion today. A little bit about me. So my name is Jamie Harper. I lead the Microsoft education business across the US. And I spent a lot of time actually before in this role overseas in Singapore and also South Africa. I'm a proud alumni of Clemson University, where I have a degree in engineering. And I guess one of the things that is very interesting in the education space is we span the 15,000 school districts in the country, all the way to the thousands of colleges and research universities, including all the academic medical centers in the country. So it's been a very, very interesting and challenging year, certainly in the country. And as Bill said, I'm the father of 3 teenagers who are all virtual schooling. So in my spare time, I am the internet help desk for the Harper House to make sure everything's up and running and smooth. So looking forward to everything being seamless today.
That's fantastic. Well, thanks again for all of you being with us. I'm really excited that we have representation from industry and a provider organization, but also each of you represent kind of education, research, and patient care, all of which are extremely relevant to our entire audience today. So we want to talk a little bit about digital transformation and what that term means and where we think things are headed. So maybe we'll start with you, Jamie, and just ask you to use your crystal ball and give us an example of how digital transformation will change your industry in the future.
Yeah, I think the education industry has been, dramatically impacted, certainly in the past year. And there are, as you mentioned, there are some silver linings. And so one of the things as we look forward, we are collecting a lot of information. The amount of technology we had, and we've used this term, there's been more transformation really in the first 2 months of COVID than I think the education industry saw in 2 years prior. And so as you look forward, we certainly think for a portion of the population is really going to benefit from all these different systems. So you can imagine all these systems be able to be customized to truly have some more personalized learning. And imagine what that could do to things like our progress on things like algebra and literacy, and be able to kind of tailor individual courses, individual assignments to students, which now will have a lot more devices and a lot more technology, in their hands. So I think for a big portion of the population, we're going to see a lot more improvements in the coming years who really did modernize and kind of took advantage of that transformation opportunity.
Yeah, fantastic. It's kind of a mandate now. We've all been forced to innovate in maybe ways we were resistant to previously. Dr. Colley, what does digital transformation mean to you and as a physician and also the leader of a health system?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. For the past couple of years, I've made this a focus for our leadership team, and we've really been working on this. It's not an intuitive definition to all. I think if people didn't study it, they immediately go to and say, oh, that's just new technology and things that come along. But it's really much, much more than that. Digital transformation is a fundamental change in business practices and operations as the result of new digital technologies being available and introduced into that business. Now, that's a mouthful, but basically what that means is we're going to change the way we deliver business in healthcare. And on the clinical side, it's basically how we deliver care to patients. So it's going to change many, many things, but it's done through these technologies. And, there's been digital transformation over the last 30 years in certain industries, and it's crept a little bit into healthcare, but these technologies are much more widely available. They're a lot less expensive than they were. And I think when you put all of those together, I think it's going to completely, fundamentally change where healthcare is going in the next 10 years, and hopefully something that patients are going to enjoy even more. I often give the example that we do well with patient satisfaction here at MUSC, but if you compare patient satisfaction, and we're a high performer, but you compare us to other industries, it's mediocre at best. We've heard other leaders often call it the cream of the crop. That's where that we at MUSC are doing great across all of healthcare, but we have so much further to go in terms of other industries. So I personally think it's going to completely upend the way we do business and what people expect from healthcare going into the future.
Great. Well, as a patient and a healthcare executive myself, I mean, even simple things like self-scheduling, right? I mean, the way in which I can go online and pick a seat on an airplane. How do we make sure that we're more consumer-centric going forward? Bill, what about in your world? With your crystal ball, where do you see digital transformation taking Verily and having the largest impact in the life sciences?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for Verily, really what our mission is taking the health information that's out there and making it useful to improve patients' lives. I mean, that's kind of at the heart of it. And if you look at what Google has been able to do with Google Search and with Google Maps, of taking a lot of data that's out there and making it useful and having it as part of people's lives, and making, and Caroline, to your point, of just making it easy for people to have that information and make it useful, that's really at the heart of what we're doing. And so there's three big buckets around that. One is just around the collection. So having easy ways to get the data in, tools to capture it, both from people being able to enter the information, but then also from different sensors and other things. So for example, I've got one on, we have a Study Watch, which is a clinical grade sensor that we put in clinical studies to collect activity and ECG and other things. And so that's one big thing. And then the other one is organizing that data so that it's useful. There's a lot of silos within healthcare in terms of where data is stored and what it is. And so organizing it in a way where it's useful, where you can use machine learning and artificial intelligence and other things to generate insights. And then the last big bucket is around activating that data to generate those insights, things that we haven't been able to see before because there's either been, it's hard to understand or new data that's coming in. So those are the big three buckets. I think specifically within Baseline, which is the division I'm with, which is focused on clinical research, what we're aiming to do is really accelerate the way to get treatments to market. These clinical trials take a lot of time. They're very painful to conduct, and there's the systems that are out there today are just more or less inefficient. And so, ways that we're doing that is using digital tools to help really transform where the clinical trial is even conducted. So right now, it's in the clinical site, and a lot of those are at big academic centers where these studies are administered. And so we're moving it away from there and more into the home to allow people to really participate. So opening it up, making it democratized around anybody that is interested in clinical research can actually be part of it. and lowering those barriers, and then also just making it efficient so that when you're conducting these trials, you can do it faster, you can enroll faster, you can get the data faster, and be able to get products to market. And then the last piece is just getting new novel data in there so that you can find out insights and make claims around treatments that are going to be helpful for patient care. So that's kind of what I see in the future, is just a much more easier way to participate in research, better insights to help with personalized medicine, so that if you're, whatever your background is, you know exactly the right treatment that you should be on.
Thanks. That's really helpful. I've noticed in all of your just kind of opening comments, there's a lot of mention of different types of technologies. So Bill, you mentioned sensors, and Jamie, you talked about the tools that are going to be used for remote learning into the future, and certainly telehealth from a delivery perspective. So there's kind of this $1 million question that's going around about whether digital transformation or digital innovation is more about the technology itself and how it gets leveraged, or is it more about how organizations adopt the technology and therefore change their business, change their culture? So I'd like to have a little bit of a debate and see whether you guys think it's more about the technology piece, or really it's more about culture. Dr. Colley, do you want to start?
That's a great question. And Caroline knows I'll get on a soapbox about this. In our organization, as we've gone through learning about this, we've been very purposeful amongst our leadership team to read certain books and discuss them. In the beginning, it was all about the technology, and everybody said, "Oh, it's the technology," and the big four that we talk about a lot: cloud computing, Internet of Things, AI, as well as God, I'm blanking on the other one. That's all right. It'll come to me. So it was all about the technology, but then, as we dug into it a little bit more, we actually got people to the other side, but they went to the other side and said, "Oh, it's not about the technology. It's just about how we have to change the business. It's about culture. It's about changing our way of thinking." But the reality is really down the middle, right? You can't just change things and not know how you're going to change them. You have to understand, what is Internet of Things? When I started this whole thing, I used to hear that term all the time, but I didn't really understand it. I don't even like the name. I like what Bill's using, wide availability of sensors that can collect information. I think that's actually more helpful. But you got to kind of understand that in order to understand how you might change the business. You have to look at cloud computing and what might that do for you. We stepped into heavy cloud computing right at the beginning of COVID, when we went heavy into telehealth. Now, we've been doing a lot of telehealth at MUSC, but we couldn't go to the next level because almost immediately we were told that we don't have enough server time. And we quickly moved into the cloud, and it allowed us within a week or two to go very big in terms of telehealth. So you got to kind of understand those things to actually figure out how to change the business. So I don't think it's one versus the other. If you made me lean, I'm going to lean a little bit toward understanding the business side. But I have found, even personally, that you can't lean too hard there. You really do need to understand, what is it about cloud computing that's different? What is it about these technologies that are going to change things? So I'll stay in the middle, but you forced me to lean. I'm just going to lean a little bit to the fundamental business change.
Okay, fair enough. What about you, Jamie?
Yeah, I lean a little bit more towards the culture side, and I've been Microsoft for almost 22 years, across several different CEOs, and what I would share is that our current CEO really has focused on a culture change, and you have to feel like you're part of an organization that is focused on learning and growing. And when you do that and you create that culture, you have people who start to take thoughtful risks, who feel like they have a supportive leadership environment. Well, they'll learn from whatever happens from that thoughtful risk, and then go back into their organizational culture and their business, to Pat's point. So you have to have the technology and you have to have that innovation, but that culture really buttresses a lot of what you're trying to do. And we'll just inside of Microsoft in the last 4 to 5 years, we've made dramatic improvements. And I think we always had good technology, but the culture really has unlocked a lot of good ideas that have risen to the surface because the culture allows them to. And you're much more focused on, working with our clients, working with our partners. So I lean a little bit more towards the culture side, but you need a little bit of both.
All right, Bill, are you going to break from the crowd, or are you sticking with the culture train?
You would think that being part of Google and Alphabet, I would say only technology. But actually, I'm going to side with Dr. Colley and Jamie on this and go with culture. I do believe that you do need to have technology, but it has to, what we've found is that it really, and Caroline, it comes to your point, it needs to be intuitive. It needs to be easy for the user to use it. It doesn't need to be all that cutting edge sometimes. I mean, this is I think in general, the healthcare industry lags behind a lot of other industries, and just even having good software is good enough to make a major dent. Why I side more with the culture change side of things is that at its heart, healthcare is a lot about behavior change and culture. Patients taking their medications or physicians knowing what treatments to offer is a lot of that is behavioral and not purely just around technology. And so it's and I think this is one of the things that a lot of tech companies get wrong, is that they think it's only about technology, and they come out with this great technology and they expect the healthcare industry to immediately adopt it. And it's not the case. I mean, it really takes a lot of time. You're going into each health system, having sold the cutting edge innovative technology before. It's individual conversations with physicians to get them to use the technology, with health systems to get them to adopt it, and it takes a long time to get things to get adopted versus like the consumer world where things can take off almost overnight. So I'll side with the cultural side as well.
Man, I was hoping for a more intense debate, but it sounds like there's clear consensus here, so I need to just let it go.
I mean, Carolyn, let me push on that just a little bit, because you guys are both tech companies. I can just give example after example. Sometimes in healthcare, we rely on our IS or IT team to come up with the new technologies, and sometimes we as leaders, we rely on them, but we don't know what technologies exist. I'll give you an example. About 10 years ago, we were having some issues with glucose monitoring in the hospital. And at the time, we were really having trouble with getting the results to our physicians quickly. And that was the basic issue. And we went through all kinds of machinations to do it. And, I could tell you, this is a task force that was going on for months to help solve this. And some young guy came in and said, how come the glucometers can't be all hooked up to the internet and just report automatically? And it was all of a sudden, it was an aha that was possible. Team actually looked into it. There were systems available that could do that, albeit they were a little bit early. But it forced us to go to that new technology. Now, but I'll use that same technology. When we went to it, the culture change was significant because the results were coming in too quick. So, and then we had to deal with that. So it is a both. We do need to understand how technology might change some of the basic things we do every day. And sometimes we don't think they're those solutions are out there.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, I do think obviously a lot of members in the audience today are trying to think about how these technological advances are going to impact their businesses and what they need to focus on. So maybe a quick rapid fire question. I mean, we know the kind of big four areas in digital innovation that are coming, right? And, Dr. Colley, I think you referenced a few of these earlier: cloud computing, artificial intelligence / machine learning, big data, and then Internet of Things. So if you had to pick one, which do you think is going to be the most transformational for the folks who are attending the conference with us today? And maybe we'll go to Bill first.
So I would go with artificial intelligence, or AI, almost hands down, around how transformational it is around patient care. Let's just focus on, I guess, patient care. And the main reason is that with AI, it allows you to analyze a lot of data very quickly and provide either faster diagnosis or better treatment. And you're starting to see this with a lot of new companies in the healthcare area. I've been a part of a couple of them myself. What you're able to do with AI, it takes a lot less resources, and it also helps with the patient care. So I'll just give one example. The last company I was with before Verily was a neurodiagnostics company called Cerebel, and we had a rapid EEG system where the EEG would come in, and we used machine learning to develop an algorithm to do seizure detection. So what would typically take an epileptologist a long time to review, hours and hours of EEG to diagnose non-convulsive seizure, so a treatment could come out. We could do that almost real time, looking at the data, and so what it leads to is just faster diagnosis, faster treatment, and also reduces the burden on these epileptologists and these specialists of reviewing this stuff and not waking them up at the middle of the night to be able to do diagnosis and other things. So that's one of the things I see a lot of potential in is AI.
Great. What do you think, Jamie?
Yeah, I would also lean towards AI, and I would just call out with an example that there really is a bit of a virtuous cycle, because you kind of need what cloud computing offers, which is that low storage, low cost of computing. We've always had relatively big data sets, and that relative is important because that they're growing so quickly. And then you put those machine learning models on top of that, and then that virtuous cycle kind of can create that innovation. And the example I'd use is during the last year, we worked with one university to do a model that would normally take on their high performance compute cluster. It would take weeks to run, and we did it overnight by just getting tens of thousands of cores and putting them together in a cluster and then just running it overnight. And I think that model, that AI model, was the innovation, but to have the scale of the data and the computing was important to make that AI render and work and have a result. So, but I think AI is going to be a huge transformational breakthrough for us.
Yeah, it sounds like to me you're almost kind of laying out this argument that cloud computing, access to big data, Internet of Things, which produces data, are almost all feeders into artificial intelligence, which is what's going to be truly transformational. Pat, anything to add on that topic?
I would agree with that. I mean, to Bill's point, we already have a lot of big data today in healthcare, particularly, a lot of it. And just because a lot of us went to electronic health records in the last 10 years, and you almost can't even review an entire chart anymore. So I could use AI today to help make better decisions, find things quicker, all kinds of stuff. But by having Internet of Things or sensors and that's going to feed more data and bigger data sets, and going to need to have some kind of cloud computing in order to deal with all that. So I would agree it sort of feeds on itself. But we do prospective payment here at MUSC, and I did prospective payment almost 30 years ago when I first got into healthcare. I couldn't even imagine doing that, doing prospective payment without AI these days. And yet that's exactly what we did 30 years ago. It was gambling. But today I know exactly what's going on. I know who the high-risk patients are. We can really do something different. And I think it's going to accelerate where healthcare is going in terms of this value-based atmosphere that we're hurtling toward.
Great. Well, we're certainly giving the audience a lot to think about. So if you aren't thinking about artificial intelligence and how to apply it to your business now, sounds like a good time to start. So, we can't avoid the whole conversation around COVID-19 and the global pandemic that we're all living through right now. So I really want to talk a little bit about how digital health and rapid innovation has helped your organizations kind of make it through the pandemic so far. We're obviously in an ever-evolving journey. When we first kicked off almost a year ago now with the pandemic, we were really focused on testing. Now we're talking about vaccine distribution and how are we going to track, or are we going to track who's been vaccinated? So there's always something coming down the pike, and it's really forced us outside of our comfort zones. So I'd love to hear from you, Jamie. What's the most exciting project going on at Microsoft right now when it comes to digital health that's applicable to COVID-19?
Yeah, and so I guess that is, to your point earlier, there are some silver linings in terms of some of the very rapid innovations that we've been working on. And so I guess a couple examples I'd give. When researchers would do their research, there was a kind of a story that the person would go to their lab. And so when you look at one of the challenges we had with COVID is, you physically could not get into spaces. And I don't think many folks ever designed their research enterprise to be remote. And so when you make a research enterprise or a research lab remote, it creates a lot of challenges in terms of access, security, and then to the point that were made earlier, how do you use all the different tools that you might have used that were primarily on premise? And so one of the things that I've been really amazed on is how universities and medical centers have figured out how to do everything remote. Pat talked about telehealth, but there's a lot of work to be done just to make sure research can be handled remotely. And imagine there's processes around transplants that was all very much on-premise physical. And so how do you make a supply chain for transplants or all the different research things that we're working on? So I'm just really impressed with, when I look at some of our university partners, how they were able to pivot, a lot of their research to really accelerate in COVID. And so there's a lot of work that was obviously done in the vaccines, supply chains. We're working with a lot of different states and cities now in terms of vaccine registration and distribution. But I still am amazed on some of the different research work that's come out, just during COVID, and I think that's actually made innovation even go faster at some of these big, research enterprises where it had a different pace before COVID, and now it seems like that pace has accelerated for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, Pat, tell us a little bit about how digital innovation has impacted MUSC's response, and then maybe also thinking what's coming next. I mean, what are we preparing for in the next chapter of the pandemic journey?
Well, for MUSC, the biggest change was telehealth. So for us, we are a Center for Telehealth, and actually a national center, one of two in the nations. We pivoted heavily into telehealth about 7 years ago, really in collaboration with the state of South Carolina. We developed many programs over the years, something like 80 some different telehealth programs of all different kinds, some face-to-face, some asynchronous, some monitoring at home, all kinds of stuff. And we were growing, progressively every year when it came to telehealth. But come COVID just launched all of that extremely fast and put almost the entire enterprise onto telehealth quickly. Part of that was because we were ready for it. Part of it was because we had to make some quick decisions in order to get there as well. But what we've also seen as COVID is not impacting us, we've seen relaxing of that telehealth go back pretty quickly. So what we've tried to do here is we're actually making an institutional decision that all of our visits going into the future will have at least 30% of them will be telehealth. So we don't want to retract all the way back, which gets to that culture change. If once COVID's over, if you don't do anything different, we're going to go back to that lower level. So we're maintaining it. So in order to maintain it, requires a lot of education, a lot further investment in technology. So that's been the most transformative for us. At the moment, what's coming forward, vaccine logistics and everything there. We're vaccinating as many people on a daily basis as we see for everything else in our entire health system. So just think about that. So we've doubled the number of people we see simply because of vaccination, and that's not going away. So that's going to continue to stress us. We're going to have to find the right ways to do this. And at the same time, we still have a very limited supply. So what we're doing today, we actually need to take up 3 or 4 levels, once more adequate supply is available. And, there's going to be a variety of tools that we're going to have to use in order to make that as efficient as possible and get those shots in arms, get them in the right arms. We're going to have to go out and find those high-risk communities. Don't just open the door and say anybody can get vaccinated, but purposefully we're going to have to use things like AI to find where those high-risk patients are. So there's a lot ahead of us. I don't see us really relaxing from COVID. It's going to be another year just because the whole vaccination component is in front of us at this point.
Great. I would imagine some folks are shuddering by the fact that you said it's going to be another year. So you heard it here first, folks. But, things are getting better. I think we're seeing progress, but we're a long way away from actually getting back to normal state. Bill, tell us what's going on at Verily. How have you guys been using artificial intelligence or big data to combat COVID-19?
Yeah, so we've been doing actually quite a bit around COVID in a few different areas. Our business wasn't really set up to do this, but it was more of a call to action of, okay, where can we help out when this pandemic started? And one of the immediate first things that we looked at is how can we repurpose our clinical studies platform to be able to do screening and testing for COVID testing, and so we stood that up, and now to date we've done over 2.3 million tests so far. We as of next week we will be in over 1,200 testing sites across 16 states. To allow for a very seamless process of being able to get screened, schedule an appointment, go there, get the results immediately returned through directly to the participant. So that's one of the things we've helped recruit for different studies, some COVID vaccine studies, as well as antibody trials to get participants in there. We also created a solution for employers and universities to be able to bring their employees and their students back to work in campus safely through rigorous testing and symptom tracking and other things. And so a lot of that is very software driven. We've also stood up a CLIA lab ourselves because the turnaround times for some of the larger labs were taking a while. So we decided to create our own CLIA lab. So there's a lot of things that we've been jumping in. I think the one that's most exciting right now is that we're helping support the Pfizer phase 4 surveillance study for their vaccine to track 20,000 healthcare workers over the course of 2 years to see, the long-term safety profile for and efficacy for this vaccine. And we're doing it in a fully decentralized way. So really anybody can participate. The study's called Hero Together. If you're a healthcare worker and you've gotten vaccinated, you can join. And we've used our technology to be able to really allow anybody to join from anywhere.
That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. We're rounding out towards kind of the end of our time together. So maybe a final question and then we can wrap up. I'd love to hear if you all have any advice for our very diverse audience today. Many of them create products and services in the life sciences. They work in healthcare delivery, or they support the life science industry, across the region and the country. I think we have a lot of accountants and lawyers and other folks who support the industry as a whole. So, Dr. Colley, I'll start with you. What advice do you have for the audience today that you want to leave them with before we close out?
I would, a lot of you are trying to connect with academic medical centers. I meet with people all the time, and I would come in with a relatively quick, balanced approach. I've had companies come in, it's all about value, like I was telling you before, it's all about the one side. Or I've other companies come in, talk all about the technology. I would say more people are leaning over here, and yet they don't tell me about the technology. So I would come in balanced. I really need to hear, I'm a sophisticated consumer when it comes now to digital transformation. So if you want to connect with me, tell me about the technology, but you don't need to go into a ton of detail, but then talk about the value side. And I really need to hear both, and that helps me make a decision going into the future. So I hope that helps.
Great. Jamie?
Yeah, I've seen some amazing technology from a variety of partners and companies, and I guess I would recommend two things. One is security. At the end of the day, people who want to use technology want to have a trust. They want to trust the technology works and does what it says it's going to do, but more importantly, it's going to cause no harm. And so I think there's just a general reluctance, and especially with some recent issues in the news, and just know that hospitals and healthcare and education institutions are some of the most targeted enterprises for cybersecurity. So I think security just needs to be at the core of what you do, and to make it really easy for people. And then the second, don't underestimate diversity in your team, diversity in your staff. I think Pat had an example where you have to have a voice of someone who has a different perspective than you. And I think, whether it's the state of South Carolina, your individual enterprises, make sure you have that diversity across your staff. You'll be amazed at what that does for you, and it creates, again, a great dividend into your company and going forward into your community. So I just say, make sure that diversity of thought and diversity overall, I think that's just beneficial for all companies.
I love that. Thanks so much for sharing that, Jamie. We've certainly found that diverse voices and perspectives beget innovation. So it's extremely relevant to today's conversation. Bill, final word of advice for the crew today?
Sure, and I'll take it in. There's two, I think, different groups. There's the large companies and health systems, and then there's, I would say, like the digital tech companies or ones that are newer. For the large companies and health systems, I think it's really being open-minded around technology. Healthcare in general is conservative, but thinking of ways to pilot certain things where you address your concerns, and also just having an expectation that a lot of this stuff will come out and it won't be perfect, and that there is going to be some things that it's going to be improved. And a lot of these things that we're talking about are ones where actually the development is a lot faster. So anything that has to do with software, AI, those sorts of things are things where it can be improved in a faster turn than a lot of other, like drugs and other things that take a lot longer time. And then on the digital tech companies and the new entries to the space, with COVID, you're seeing a lot of people kind of enter healthcare that hadn't really been in before, trying to help, which is great. But you really need to understand the industry. There's a lot of nuances and other things that are specific to healthcare, and making sure that you have a good understanding of those things around how reimbursement works, around data privacy, like Jamie was mentioning, and other things, and making sure that you are getting either consultants or experts to help you with that, because you can spend a lot of time on developing things that are just not going to do well in the market if you don't really think about these other things in advance.
That's fantastic. Thanks. Well, what a really interesting discussion today. I really want to thank each of you for being willing to give us the time and share your perspective and thoughts. I think the major takeaways are COVID's not going away, and artificial intelligence is going to be transformative to the life science and healthcare industries. So I appreciate your help in driving those points home today. Finally, I want to thank MedPoint, again, our sponsor for this segment. Without you, today's conference would not be possible. So thanks again. And with that, I look forward to the rest of our day. Thank you so much and have a wonderful afternoon.